In this video I want to talk a bit about what the year of the Linux desktop really means. And these are just going to be some of my thoughts about it. And I'm going to start off with the most obvious arguments and things. And then I'll get a bit deeper into the stuff and what I really think about it and what I think it means in the context of everything, really. So, first of all, I mean, you've heard the term the year of the Linux desktop, of course. I mean, the term itself is just, I mean, you know what it means. It means that the year in which the Linux desktop kind of takes over or can compete with like Microsoft and macOS when it comes to user base and stuff like that. And of course, it's getting more and more popular because Linux as a whole is getting more and more popular. So especially like easier distros like Ubuntu and stuff like that. And the question is, of course, okay, but what does this mean in the context also of the free software community, quote unquote, or the open source software community and whatnot? So what does this mean, especially for like people like us? I'm just gonna say people like us. I mean, if you've seen the rest of my channel, you know whether you fit into that category or not. So people who like actually like want to know what they're doing on their computer, so they want to be aware of their computing and these people, so people like us. I mean, we normally have like more advanced distros, quote unquote. So stuff like okay, Arch is maybe a bit mainstream by this point, but also Arch. I mean, it's a more advanced distro or like Gentoo or stuff like that. But of course, the distro itself doesn't really mean anything. It's what you do on it and how you do it and stuff like that. All right. Okay, but first let's get into the argument. So first, I want to talk about a bit about the benefits, quote unquote, so the pros, and then a bit about the cons, and this is just like just to get into the topic, and then I'll talk a bit about more of my thoughts, more maybe a bit deeper thoughts. All right, okay, let's start with the benefits, and I mean there are obvious benefits. So the first, I mean, you can read them here, like more software support, driver support, bug fixes, more people and resources. So it's all about more, so more quantity, because there are more people involved, because more people are using like Linux distros and stuff like that. There, of course, is gonna be more stuff. So there's more financial incentive for companies to support Linux, more driver support from hardware manufacturers, more bug fixes because there's just more people and resources involved. Resources in terms of like money and also developers and stuff, more people, again, when it comes to user base and so on and so forth. And I mean, there are a bunch of more of these kind of pro arguments. So why it's good that Linux is getting more attention and more users and so on and so forth. And of course, you can ask kind of critical questions about all of these points. So when it comes to software support, so what software are we talking about? Like, is it the Adobe suite? Is that really something good when they finally get support for Linux? Is that really something to like be happy about? Or should we rather try to improve our own alternatives for software like that? So for example, GIMP and stuff like that. More driver support, like drivers for what? Like for graphics cards? Like what purpose do these really serve? Like you can ask like a lot of critical questions about that. Also bug fixes. Just because there are more bug fixes and more people and resources, will that make software inadvertently worse? Because it's just possible to make it better again afterwards. So you don't have to think about that much. Don't have to think about that much about your software like design and your first versions, because there's just so much support and money that you can improve it afterwards, and you start using all these bloated frameworks and like JavaScript stuff and all that kind of stuff. So and of course the last point, more people and resources. What kind of people? What kind of resources? Like are people who are just jumping on the Linux bandwagon really that important? to this free software space. And resources also, like what kind of resource are we talking about? Like money is great in some regards and necessary, of course, for like infrastructure and stuff like that. But I mean, money doesn't come for free. It's normally attached to like contracts and kind of stuff which you may not want to trade for it. So one great example is, of course, Mozilla and Firefox, because Mozilla gets a large sum of money from Google actually to have Google as the default search engine in Firefox. So is that the kind of stuff you want to really trade for money? Because I mean, in the end, people using Firefox, that's cool and all, but if they're still using Google, like it kind of starts to miss the point. All right. So again, these are of course valid points. I mean, there's no arguing about this. These and many more, they are of course very valid, but you can ask critical questions about this stuff. All right. So let's go on to the cons, quote unquote. And again, this is just the surface level stuff, really. Okay. So the cons, I've listed some of them here. As with the pros, there are many more points you can talk about with this stuff. So stuff you can write on a pro-cons list, like I've done here. So the first one is things get more dumbed down. This is kind of necessary to attract more people. You have to lower the bar, lower the entry, so more people get in. That's just how it is. And I'll go into some more details later on. More bloat. Again, this is what I just said. If software has more support from companies, more backing, more user base, or if it's just easier to find bugs, then this may lead, maybe not, but this may lead to more bloated software being used. Like, for example, in the web, where you have just like these huge JavaScript frameworks, which are to a certain point really unnecessary, and stuff like that. So, or Electron-based applications, or like in the Linux space, we already have like flat packs, or what they're called. Or snap packs. I don't know. I don't know what these are called. You know what I mean. Okay. Higher technical requirements. So this is kind of a weird point. What I mean is really, if there are more companies and more money and more resources in Linux, it may lead to a kind of dynamic where you need to kind of keep up with all of that. So one thing is, for example, the web. Again, I'll use the web as an example. So because Chrome is Chrome, and Chrome does a lot of stuff, and it does a lot of stuff good, the web kind of adapts and settles on Chrome. So people are developing websites for Chrome and stuff like that. And if you're not using Chrome, you kind of have to keep up, because then suddenly you can support a lot of features which Chrome supports, which users expect, but which you just can't keep up with because you're not Google. So that's kind of what I mean by that. Again, that also ties into the next point, dependency on big companies, obviously, because a big operating system which is made for like more non-technical users, I'll call them, it really needs a big company because it needs a lot of resources, because it needs to do a lot of stuff, which is kind of resource intensive. And the last point is just a bit more non-technical, maybe. More possibilities are not always good. So is it good? Is it a good thing that Linux suddenly has support for, or has been getting more and more support for like video games and stuff? Is that really a good thing? Yeah. So in case of video games, I don't think it is. And I may go into that in a separate video, but yeah, stuff like that. All right. And again, you can list a ton more cons and a ton more pros and stuff like that, and you can go back and forth all day arguing whether it's a positive or negative, blah blah. But that's not really what this video is going to be about. All right, my prediction is Linux will eventually take over on the desktop. And I personally think that it will kind of it will more and more replace Windows, because like I'm not in the Windows thing, but I've heard from multiple like people that Windows 11 is kind of even more shittier or let's not say shitty, even more maybe problematic than like Windows 10 and so on and so forth. And I think it's only going downhills, really. And this has multiple reasons, I think, but they're not really important. But the point is, Linux is only getting better, of course, and is only receiving more like resources and so on and so forth, as it has for like a long time. And I mean, Microsoft is even implementing, like they have even implemented like this Windows subsystem for Linux, which should be named the other way around because it's a Linux subsystem for Windows. So you can run like a Linux virtual machine in Windows and stuff like that. So yeah, there's kind of more merging happening between the two, I think. And I think it will eventually just come to a point where you can do all the stuff you can do on Windows on Linux, and more people will switch to it, especially with like big companies getting more into the Linux open source thing. But I don't think that Apple and macOS and all that stuff, I don't think that's ever gonna disappear. So I think Apple will hold their grounds, kind of, because this next slide is about it. Apple won't get into open source. I feel like because they are just too rich. Like Apple is just too rich, and they have their own hardware, they have their own software, they have their own like CPU architecture, kind of. So Apple is just Apple, and they're just too big for open source, maybe. I don't know. So it's just a feeling, but I don't think they will get into open source like Microsoft is doing at the moment, or for the last few years. But again, these are all just like very general predictions and what I think is gonna happen. But this is also kind of super unimportant. Like it doesn't really matter which name of a giant big company is on your default wallpaper. I mean, it doesn't really matter in the end. What of course does matter is if you're getting like control and so well to your operating system and so on and so forth. But I'll get into that in a second. All right. And this is also a point I want to mention in passing, and that's the reason why these are in parentheses. State control. So I think there will be, of course, more state control in the future, like we've seen, for example, with the EU USB-C thing, where, like, again, Apple is now kind of forced to use the USB-C charging connector instead of their own proprietary stuff. And I think this will, of course, continue, and it will also probably impact Linux distros, especially if they're made by a huge company, which can be regulated. So, and this would be also very easy to and I'll talk about that in a second, a bit more. But yeah, so state control is a thing that also impacts every company, and for that reason, it's kind of like if you want to have more corporate control in Linux, or if there is more corporate control in Linux, it also means kind of more state regulation, at least in the long run. Even though at the present there may be none on the horizon, which we can see, that may change eventually. And this is not really the case for like free software kind of community mailing list, random Git repositories on some random website kind of projects. I mean, this doesn't really impact them because they're not heuristically you can't really who's to charge there. And because it's free software, you can't really control it. And that changes with big projects. But I'll get into that a bit more. Alright, so again, open source and Linux will win, quote unquote, because technique and technical convergence. And so what I mean by that is Linux and open source software is just better technically. And that so open source is the best development model, because in open source only technical merit counts. There is no profit motive in the way. And that doesn't mean open source software can generate profits, but it does mean because it's open source, you can't have a profit motive like you can with proprietary software. So in proprietary software, you can always try to restrict something and put something behind a paywall and or surveil people and fetch data from them and stuff like that. With open source, you can't do that really, because, or at least there's not really a incentive, because people can just fork the software and create their own version and stuff like that. So in open source, the best technical solution is always the one that actually is being used, obviously. I mean, this is kind of an obvious point, but I think it's important to mention. So open source is the best development model, and that is why all the big companies are slowly adopting it. And of course, one solution we are seeing everywhere nowadays is open source plus a proprietary blob. So you get the best software because, again, open source is the best development model because there are the most people working on it. The only technical merit can count, really. You have people from all over the world working on it. You get free development from everyone. You get bug reports from everywhere. Yeah, I mean, you know how the workflows of these big open source projects are. But you also get control through like a binary blob, which you put as a cherry on top in your release. And I mean, you know projects which are doing this. So I've just listed 3 here: Android, Chrome, and VS Code. And these are not small projects by any means, but they all depend on open source projects, or open source code rather, and open source projects. But in the end, they're still proprietary software in their release. So yeah, and there are tons more projects which are like that. But I think these are like the most obvious ones, which half the world uses. All right, so that obviously doesn't equal quote-unquote freedom, because one small proprietary blob is enough to corrupt the whole project. So it doesn't really matter if something is 99.9% free software or open source software. If you have like a small proprietary blob, it can corrupt the whole thing. So yeah, I mean, this also is very obvious. If you've ever thought about like free software, or if you use free software and are in this kind of space, you know that this is the case. But yes, free software is a prerequisite for freedom, and I think it's a hard prerequisite for that. And freedom, of course, meaning kind of freedom within the context of technological society. And if you use computers, kind of with that connotation or in that context, of course, because without it, I mean, you really don't have any possibilities, or at least not the rights to do anything with your software. If you use proprietary software, you can't look at the source code. I mean, you can disassembly stuff, and you can still hack on it. And I mean, there's a huge like community of people who have done that in the past, obviously, and are still doing it with like, especially in Windows, with like cracked Windows software and cracked games and stuff like that, or broken DRM and stuff like that. But it's really an uphill battle. And but yeah, that does exist, but still, this is all like kind of underground, illegal kind of stuff. And with free software, of course, that isn't the case. So with free software, you have the rights and the freedoms to do whatever you want with your software, or what the license allows you to do, which is in most cases everything you would want to do. And this really is a hard prerequisite. All right, one point I want to talk about, which ties into the point a few slides ago with the open source software plus proprietary blob, is software complexity. And this also ties into the whole free software is freedom thing, because I mean, these projects like Android and Chrome, they are open source to like the biggest extent. But that doesn't really mean anything, because these projects are so huge and so complex that you as or I or anyone as a single person can't do anything. You can't really just change a line or two in a configuration and get like a different result or stuff like that, because the project is just so huge and so complex. So complexity kind of negates a lot of the freedoms, or at least in a practical sense, it negates them, because while you may have the freedom to do like to change the stuff and fork it and stuff like that, the project is just so huge you don't even know where to begin. Like you have to install like gigabytes and gigabytes of development environment stuff just to try to compile the thing and stuff like that. So I think software complexity really is like a hidden problem, or not really hidden, but like a problem that's not often thought about, because, well, I mean, the software has this and this license, I can theoretically do anything I want with it, but in practice the things really are kind of different if the software is quite complex. And again, this also ties into what I've said before with like, the kind of free software hacking community, kind of this stuff, where you really don't have a lot of complex programs. I mean, if I look at the stuff I use, like the Suckless suite, or even this presentation program Send, I mean, also by the Suckless guys, of course. I mean, this is simple software, and this is why it's so popular in this kind of space. So the complexity is very low, so the hackability is very high, and this is really what you want in your software. So you can practically use your free software freedoms. All right. Yeah. Okay. Next up, I want to talk about normies, and this is also why in the thumbnail I put like the NPC meme and the Linux penguin, because that's kind of what's relevant when it comes to the year of the Linux desktop. Because what it comes down to with popularity is, of course, getting into getting more and more of mainstream appeal, maybe. And mainstream obviously means normies. And normies is like a term which is kind of like, it depends on where you're coming from, what you associate with it, of course. But in terms of like the free software space, it's generally I would say means like people who don't care about their computing, like who use proprietary operating systems, proprietary software, and they don't really care about it. Like, they're not even aware of it. They just think, okay, I turn on my computer, I do my stuff, and I turn it off and whatever, and do something else, and you don't really think about it. And yeah, I mean, and that is really already the main problem, is they don't care. Like, they are ignorant towards the software they use. Yeah, and this is really, again, this is the main problem, I think, because that's not something you can change. Because you can't change people. I mean, not really. And ignorance is something which, I mean, inherently prevents you from doing anything, really, because you are just gonna get ignored. If someone is ignorant, you can't do anything. You can, of course, try to like force them and assert pressure on them, and stuff like that. So you can try to do stuff that they can't ignore anymore. So in this whole context of the Linux desktop debate, this would be something like, for example, companies forcing their employees to use a Linux distro or stuff like that. And I mean, what good does that do? The people are doing it. I mean, they may be doing it, like stuff like that. They may then install or get a Linux distro on their work laptop installed, but they're not doing it out of free will. They're not going to be motivated to learn anything about that, and they're not going to say, oh wow, this is so great, how great I now have to use this. So like asserting pressure and kind of forcing people to do something against their will, so trying to like break through their ignorance, is not something that works long term, like ever. That's why dictatorships always fail. Like, no dictatorship really lasts for any real length of time. Or if it does, it's like a complete dictatorship, maybe. Okay, but this is a topic for some other time. Ignorance in terms of like, in this context of computing. I mean, and tons of people who are ignorant. Like most people in your life are ignorant towards computing. That's just how it is. The mainstream and normies, quote unquote, they don't care, because they have no reason to care. If they're not like inherently interested in the stuff, they have no reason to like care. And this is not and I don't think this is a bad thing. Like, this is not an evil thing. Oh, the stupid person doesn't care about the computing. That's not really how I see it at all. That's just the way things are. And yeah, I think this is really the main point when it comes to quote unquote the year of the Linux desktop, that people, I think, in their head kind of misunderstand. Because I think there's this implicit hope, well, if Linux just becomes more popular, then more people will use it, then more people will care about their computing and about like stuff like freedom and stuff like surveillance and control and stuff like that, and they will stop using Google and Google software and stuff like that. And I think this hope is really a false hope, because that's not how it works really. Because again, as I said in the beginning, when it came to the pro cons section thing, when you want to make something like a operating system, or if you want to make an operating system more popular, for software more popular, you will necessarily have to dumb it down. You will have to make it easier for people to use, and this is really obvious. But I mean, this is just an appeal. It is kind of appeal to the mass. It is a kind of appeal to well, you could even say appeal to dumbness, and an appeal to ignorance. So you're lowering the bar, so even more people can partake maybe and use the software, but that doesn't really do anything to the people in and of itself. So it doesn't really change anything. So I mean, what is the difference between someone using Windows or macOS and someone using a super beginner-friendly distro like Ubuntu? I mean, the practical difference is of course they are not getting surveilled and stuff like that. But this may change in the future. It may change very rapidly. I think I have I have this slide here. Would desktop Linux like normal Android be good? I mean, no, of course not. I mean, Android is just Linux underneath, deep underneath, hidden behind layers of Google software. And I mean, is normal Android that good or that privacy respecting? And is it good that people are using it? I don't know. I mean, you can judge it for yourself. But imagine like a Linux desktop distro that would be like that. I mean, what would be the point, kind of? I mean, yeah, you're using Linux and you're using mostly free software, but you're still getting controlled and surveilled through a giant big tech corporation. So in the end, what does it matter? And for most people, it wouldn't matter. Most people would be very happy if their computer would just work like they would expect it to work, and if they can do the stuff they need to do on their computer and stuff like that. Because they don't care. That's the thing. And you can't make them care by just having more numbers and more quantity. That's not how it works. So only because something is more popular doesn't make people automatically care about it in a way that goes beyond just using something that's popular. I mean, you can make this thought experiment in your own head. Like, think about someone you know who's like not into this whole free software thing at all. Like some normie who uses Windows or Mac and stuff like that, and proprietary software, and just doesn't care. Like, what would happen if Linux were to take over the world, like tomorrow? And if there would be a great new operating system which is, which is so great and so advanced and so technically perfect that everyone wants to use it, and it has like super aesthetics and every piece of software just works on it and it's just the best. And I mean, that person might then want to use it, but would they care about what's underneath? Like, would they care about like stuff like automating tasks by shell scripting? Would they care about compiling your software yourself and stuff like that? No, they wouldn't. They would only use it because it may be more convenient than what they're currently using. And yeah, I think this is really the main point. And of course, they also wouldn't care about freedom, quote unquote freedom in the context of computing, of course. They wouldn't care more about freedom than they currently do, because they have no reason to do so. And so nothing has really changed. And I think this is this is a kind of illusion and a kind of false hope, really. And yeah, and on this previous slide I had ignorance is strength, on in parentheses just a note, because you know this phrase from Orwell's 1984, and it kind of applies here as well. And I don't want to go too deep into it, but it applies here it applies here as well, and also to many other topics which are adjacent, I would say. But again, it maybe goes a bit too far for this topic. All right. So yeah, that's about ignorance. So the counter to ignorance, or the kind of the opposite of ignorance, is of course awareness. So if you're ignorant of something, you ignore it. If you're aware of something, you perceive it. And And awareness, of course, leads to knowledge and skill. Because if you're aware of something, you know something. And if you ignore something, you don't know something. And knowledge leads to skill, obviously. So, yeah, this is kind of an obvious point, but I think it's important to like talk about because, yeah, that's the way it is. And you can't really make people who don't care, who are ignorant, more aware just by, I don't know, just by quantitative number things. So, for example, by telling them that Linux is technically greater because it's like faster and more minimal, more minimal on like resources and stuff like that, or it has more software support or stuff like that. That doesn't make people more aware, because only they themselves can decide if they want to be aware or not, or if they want to be ignorant. And for most people want to be ignorant because computing for them is like kind of a black box, kind of. Well, not kind of, it is a black box for most people. And I mean, and this is kind of, and this is not like not to put anyone down. I mean, this is very understandable because computers are super complex. And if you don't have an like a inner motivation kind of to get to know them, that kind of sounds stupid, to know what's going on, if you don't have like an inner drive to understand all this stuff, you're not gonna, I mean, who has the time for this stuff? Like, it is time intensive, and it is like also, yeah, frustrating and at times, and it is a struggle to understand this stuff because it's not really trivial. But of course, it leads to, well, more freedom in the context of computing. Of course it does, because you have more knowledge, more skill, more control, and all that is freedom in the end. So you can do whatever you want without depending on anyone else, like a big company or stuff like that. Yeah. But again, as I said, becoming aware of something and getting to know something is kind of, it is inconvenient, obviously. I mean, doing most things is inconvenient. Like learning something is inconvenient. That's why most people don't learn anything. It's much more convenient to just consume product. So normies won't bother if they're not forced to. And if they are forced to, that still doesn't really get to the heart of the problem, because if they're forced to, they're only doing it because they are forced to. So yeah, again, I really think this is a false kind of hope, the year of the Linux desktop, that it will make anything better. Because I personally don't think it will really matter in the big picture. And that doesn't mean that the pros or the benefits I listed in the beginning are like not real or don't matter at all or whatnot. But this great hope that if Linux just becomes more popular and stuff like that, more people will become aware and care about these things, like not things, but about these topics, about like concepts like freedom, or not being surveilled, or not being controlled, or not being forced to like update your software, or you know what I mean. So, but they won't, just because Linux is more popular, or I don't think they won't. All right. Conclusion: popularity does improve some things. Of course, it does. I mean, obviously, popularity means more people, and that means more companies getting involved, because larger user base. It means more money. It means more developers. It means more technical infrastructure. It means all these things, of course, but they are not necessarily good in and of themselves, and it makes other things maybe worse. So, for example, more software may be packaged as like flat packs and all this stuff. So stuff where you have to install like a giant software and all this stuff on your computer just to run like a simple piece of software which could have been a statically linked binary, and stuff like that. And yeah, and maybe other things as well. It won't change people, because that's not how it works, kind of. Rather, the software changes to adapt to people, and including their ignorance. So, of course, I mean, if you want more people to use your software, you're not gonna you're not gonna scream at everyone, please change and use my software, it's so great. But you only have to change. That's not how it works. If you want people to use your software, you're gonna adapt the software to the people, because that's much easier to do, or that's possible at all to do. And after all of this is an individual struggle. So really the quest quote unquote for like freedom in computing and not being surveilled and privacy and all this stuff, it is an individual struggle, and also like a struggle for like in a group, in a quote unquote community in the internet, of course, and which everyone can contribute to and everyone can benefit from, but you have to like take on the struggle to actually get to know the stuff, like understand it on a practical level at least, so you can do anything. And that is not something the mainstream or some big company or whatever can really help with, because yeah, that's just not how it works. At least I don't think it does work like that. All right. Yeah, let me think. Have I missed anything? I don't really think I have. Yeah, so these were some of my thoughts about the whole year of the desktop Linux thing. Again, I don't want to like put anyone down for anything really. So I don't really want to, and I'm not trying to say like normies are evil because they don't care about GNU Linux or something. Like that's, I don't know. People are just the way they are, and there are good reasons for that. Or what good reasons? There are reasons for that. Let's just say that. And these reasons are very understandable if you think about it more. I think. So it's much more differentiated than just saying, yeah, well, you support Microsoft, you are an totally evil person. I mean, it's not that simple, I think. Even though if you like look at the state of the world, kind of, you might be tempted to say something or to think something like that. And I mean, yeah, that's understandable as well, because these big companies are taking over everything, and if you support them, you're kind of part of it. But I don't think there should be like this should be not like a moral debate, because that kind of gets ugly quickly, I think. So again, I think it's an individual struggle, and yeah, this is something important I want to mention also. I think there is, of course, a way to kind of have an impact on this besides. So one way people try, of course, is to make Linux more popular and stuff like that. So with like quantity, but again, that doesn't really change people because you're only impacting the software itself. But I think there is very much reason to have an impact by just like being doing your stuff, because free software is great, and to like, I even want to say quote unquote inspire people, even though inspire is kind of a cringy term, but to inspire people and to show them what free software can do and how it can improve your life is kind of a weird phrase, but you know what I mean, like why free software is actually good, and not only in terms of like practical benefits, but how really it kind of the way also you work with computers, how you interact with them, and also like you generally your view maybe of the world and society and stuff like that. I hope you kind of know what I mean by that. I may go into that in the future. All right. I hope this was kind of understandable and it may be even interesting. Let me know your thoughts, maybe in the comments if you want to. And yeah, I don't think I have very much else to say. And yeah, that's it. Have a nice day.